Today we're continuing Unit 8, Notes number 3, Changes in the Movement. So last week we focused primarily on introducing the civil rights movement, kind of more of the mainstream movement under Martin Luther King Jr., the idea of using nonviolence. These notes will focus on some of the changes, start to see some dissension within the movement. So a new type of leader. Malcolm Little was born in 1925 and he had a difficult childhood. So he has somewhat, opposite perspective than Martin Luther King Jr., where Martin Luther King Jr., had a stable family, went to college, got his bachelor's degree, got a doctorate degree. Malcolm X, not the case. At the age of 20, Malcolm X went to jail for burglary. Had a rough childhood. I believe he witnessed his father being murdered when he was a young boy. So experiencing that kind of trauma can give people different perspectives. So the way you look at the world is based on, your experiences, how you've been treated, what you've done, what you haven't done. So while in prison, Malcolm joined the Nation of Islam, and they were also known as the Black Muslims. And so he developed a philosophy of black superiority and separatism from white. So because of his kind of rough childhood, his experience in prison, his perspective is that integration, having blacks and whites work together, was not going to work. He had never had a positive experience where saw redeeming qualities in white America. And so with his involvement with the Black Muslims, began to kind of formulate this philosophy of if black people want to truly be successful, they need to separate themselves. So instead of achieving integration, the Black Muslims were promoting separatism, keeping themselves separate. They felt that was the only way they would truly be independent and be able to succeed. So a little bit more about the Nation of Islam. So in 1952, when Malcolm was released from prison, he changed his name to Malcolm X. He believed Little to be his slave name. So a lot of African Americans, when they often take the last names of plantation owners, their former masters, as their last name. So it wasn't truly representative of them, who they were, where they were from. And so he felt that Little did not represent him. So Malcolm X, that's where that comes from. So Malcolm X was now a minister for the Nation of Islam. He preached the views of Elijah Muhammad, that whites were the cause of the black condition and that blacks should separate from society. So Elijah Muhammad believed that whites were the reason they were keeping blacks down. They created laws, loopholes to limit their exposure to education. They had a higher rate of going to prison. And in a lot of cases, and in some places like the South, that was the case, that white Americans there were trying to limit and prevent the black community from succeeding. But that also wasn't all of white society. And so it was, again, for them, very black and white. They did not feel that white America was truly trying to help them. And so this message appealed to many African Americans and their growing racial pride. They believed that only other blacks would help them, and they really didn't support this mainstream movement of Martin Luther King Jr. of trying to integrate. There wasn't trust there. They didn't feel that that could be accomplished. So now you have kind of the Martin Luther King side that's nonviolent. Let's work with white America and get this solved, versus Malcolm X. White America is the cause of our stature, and let's separate. So integration, separatism, these two kind of opposing viewpoints. So Malcolm's views. In 1964, Malcolm X delivered the ballot or the bullet speech in Cleveland, where he urged other African Americans to exercise their right to vote. Here in this speech, he cautioned that they may need to take up arms. And so with this speech, because his tone was so much different than Martin Luther King Jr., he was more about if someone is attacking me, then of course I'm going to defend myself, fight back. His tone was definitely more aggressive, but he definitely wasn't encouraging violence. He wasn't saying take up arms against them. More so with this ballot or the bullet speech, because so many people were trying to limit African Americans from voting. He's basically saying either you're going to let me vote or you're going to drive me to the bullet, like kind of showing that you're creating a violent situation. I don't want to take that route, but you're forcing me to. And so people saw that as a threat, saw that as being very combative, and so he definitely got that reputation. So here's one of the very few pictures of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. Even though they're both within the civil rights movement, the same time period, they really didn't, cross paths as often as people would suspect. People like to paint them as opposites, and in a lot of ways they are. Integration, separatism, nonviolence, I'm going to defend myself. And they just were trying to solve this issue in different ways. And Malcolm X, while he is a lot more outspoken, they do share a lot of similar qualities. He was a great speaker, could inspire people, but the message was different perspectives on how they felt things should be accomplished. So break with the Nation of Islam. In March of 1964, Malcolm left the Nation of Islam over differences in strategy and doctrine. A month later, Malcolm embarked on a pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Here he learned that Islam preached racial equality, and he began to change his separatist views. So while in Mecca, he learned that Muslims came in all different colors. You had black Muslims, you had Muslims that were Arab, that maybe had lighter skin. And so he began to see that Elijah Muhammad, the black Muslims, had kind of their own particular viewpoint. And so he kind of started to change and to see that maybe that wasn't 100% true and didn't completely agree with what they were trying to accomplish. So Malcolm believed that because of his split with the black Muslims, his life would be in jeopardy because he's no longer towing the line, following the message. He has something different to say. And to the black Muslims and Elijah Muhammad, that was seen as controversial to them because if he's not a part of their team, that means that he's against them. So on February 21st, 1965, while giving a speech in Harlem, Malcolm X was shot. So death of another leader. So the assassination of Malcolm X was done in 1965. In 1968, MLK was shot. Martin Luther King Jr. Had objected to the Black Power movement. He believed that preaching violence could only end in grief. On April 3rd, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot on his hotel balcony by James Earl Ray. In response to his death, over 100 riots erupted in cities across the nation, causing lots of violence, which was everything he was against. 1968 was a very kind of tumultuous time period. You can kind of see that people during the civil rights movement are getting more antsy, upset that things aren't progressing as fast as they would like it to progress, and people's actions and behaviors become a lot more rash. So his assassination funeral, the picture on the left is the hotel balcony where he was shot. You can see the people pointing to the rooftop where the shooter was, and then also his funeral procession. Tons of people attended. It was highly publicized. People watched it on TV. Lots of people wanting to pay their respects to Martin Luther King Jr. for everything that he tried to accomplish, that he did accomplish, and just ultimately the message that he sent. So affirmative action. To help equalize education and job opportunities, the government in the 1960s began to promote affirmative action. Affirmative action programs involve making special efforts to hire or enroll groups that have suffered discrimination. Many colleges and almost all companies that do business with the federal government adopted such programs. So the idea is that if you have people in power that are making decisions based on who's going to attend this school, who's going to get this job, that sometimes those people may not be fair. So you have to force them to be fair and accept or hire people from minority groups. So they would often have a quota. So out of the 1,000 people you accept to your college, you have to have 50 of them be African American, 50 of them be Hispanic American. You need to have 200 of them women. So it tries to identify minority groups that may be skipped over. So the idea is that we have to accept them, create these programs to force them, because without it, they may not get those opportunities. By the 1970s, some people began to criticize affirmative action programs as reverse discrimination, because are you accepting them based on their qualifications or just because of the color of their skin or their gender? And so people started to kind of back away from affirmative action. Equal protection. During the 1970s, Alan Bake applied to medical school at UC Davis and was not accepted. Alan Bake was a white male. The school had set aside a certain number of spots for minority applicants. When Bake found out that some of these minority students had lower qualifications than him, maybe lower test scores, GPA, that kind of stuff, he sued the school. And the Supreme Court of California had agreed with what UC Davis did, had agreed that what they did was unconstitutional. They felt that everyone was not getting an equal chance, that they were not treating everyone equally. The university had appealed to the Supreme Court, but the decision, I believe the decision stayed. And so it's starting to see a change in affirmative action where, yes, maybe it was needed in the 1970s, but as we start to move, 1970s, 1980s, people do start to walk away from it and not try not to use it as much. It wasn't seen that it was necessary. So the Supreme Court decided that the university's program was unconstitutional. The court ordered Bake to be admitted to the university. The court also decided that the school could consider race as one factor in future admissions, but not like the only factor. So it could be part of the decision-making process in terms of, just something that they consider, but it couldn't just be like, oh, you're Hispanic American. Okay, you're in. You had to look at all the candidate as a whole. So that's the end of the notes. Make sure you go through your key terms and also that you watch notes 8.4.